okay, this would be Shahid, and this could be Yasir, and we could also have Ali here. ठीक है जी. So in this case, there are four instances. So these four instances have been defined, starting from index 0 to 3, right? And so for employee 1, first name is Nisar. For employee 2, the first name is Shahid. For employee 3, the first name is Yasir. For employee 4, the first name is Ali. Remember, the index starts from 0, therefore there is a discrepancy of 1 here in this particular case. Okay, so let me just run this. And what is this doing? Here I'm actually displaying the name of this using the for loop. So if I run this program, you will see that all these names have been displayed. Okay, so line number 25 here is representing an array of structs, and we have defined the size of that array to be 4. So starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, these would be the structs that have been defined. Okay. So there are 4 instances that have been defined in a row, right? I mean, just in one instance. ठीक है जी, इसमें हमने define कर दी. Okay, I hope this is clear. I can actually, obviously, I can put any number I want here. I can define 100 students, 100 employees here. ठीक है. And I can read this data of the employees from the file, or I can I can get this information from the user, and the user could actually get this information. User can actually input this information, but obviously inputting information about 100 employees would be a difficult task. So an easy way around would be to use a file to actually input the data, and maybe at some later stage we'll discuss कि इसको हमने कैसे करना है. So an array of structs can be defined. There is no issue in defining an array of structs as we have done in this particular case. Okay, our next discussion is about nested structures. Okay, nested structures. So let me just show you a structure here, employee type, and you can see that I've added some other variables also, like string, name के 3 variables हैं, address के 5 variables I have added, hiring date and quitting date, उसका month, day and year have been added. Some other information, for example, phone number, seller number, fax, pager, email, ID, salary, and employee ID, all these have been added in one particular struct. Now, from here we can actually develop a nested structure. Nested structure would mean that you can define a structure within a structure. So here from 10 to 11 is 10 to 12, these are all attributes that are associated with name. So what I can do is that I can actually define a structure, a separate structure, by the name of, let's say, name type, और इससे पहले अगर मैं define कर दूं तो that would be easier. ठीक है जी. So I've defined structure name type with all these 3 variables: first name, middle name and last name. ठीक है, first, last and middle. And now 16 से 18 तक जितने भी variables मैंने employee type के अंदर define किए हुए हैं, I can replace them with an instance of the structure name type. So I can say that, okay, name type name. I can write this. And what's happened here? Name type. What is name type? Name type is a structure. Okay, and that has been defined separately here. That contains the first name, the middle name, and the last name. एंड एम्प्लॉय टाइप के अंदर ये जो तीन वेरिएबल्स है उनको मैंने रिमूव करके नेम टाइप को ऐड कर दिया इन द डेफिनेशन ऑफ एम्प्लॉय टाइप. ठीक है. सो नेम टाइप इज ऑल्सो अ स्ट्रक्चर बट नाउ इट्स पार्ट ऑफ एम्प्लॉय टाइप. Right? So this becomes a nested structure. So in other words, a struct could be a member of another struct. So here name type struct is a member of another struct which is employee type. ठीक है. I can do the same with other variables also. For example, मैं address को इकट्ठा कर सकता हूँ, date को इकट्ठा कर सकता हूँ, contact type को इकट्ठा कर सकता हूँ, and I can define them here. लेट्स से कि मैंने ये डिफरेंट स्ट्रक्ट्स मैंने डिफाइन कर दिए. एड्रेस में मैंने एड्रेस 1, एड्रेस 2, सिटी, स्टेट और जिप को ऐड कर दिया. डेट के अंदर मंथ, डे एंड ईयर को ऐड कर दिया. कॉन्टैक्ट टाइप के अंदर फ़ोन, सेल, फैक्स, पेजर, ईमेल को मैंने ऐड कर दिया. और एम्प्लॉय टाइप जो मेरे पास बचेगा, आई कैन रिमूव those variables that are part of the other structs and instead make the defined structures part of employee type. तो ये मैंने कर दिया यहाँ पे. So for example, this is struct name type. ठीक है. So this is line number 36 is representing a struct. Line number 38 is representing the attributes that are associated with address, and that has been defined as a struct from in address type structure. So address 1, address 2, city, state, zip, उसको मैंने अलग एक structure बना दिया. And I have made this structure part of employee type. ठीक है. So यहाँ पे you can see that the representation has actually become more and more compact representation. तो different structs मैंने define कर दिए. अच्छा, there is another important thing that you should appreciate कि dates वहाँ पे दो थी, एक hire date थी और एक मेरे पास quit date थी. तो struct मैंने एक ही define किया, लेकिन उसके दो instances मैंने employee में define कर दिए हैं. Date type hire date type quit date. तो सेम स्ट्रक्ट बट टू इंस्टेंसेस ऑफ दैट, क्योंकि मैं हायर डेट को अलग करना चाहता हूँ फ्रॉम द क्विट डेट. अच्छा, बिकॉज द डेट कैन ऑल्सो बी यूज फॉर अदर पर्पजेज. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, आई कैन if that employee, if I want to also write down the date of birth of that employee, so I can define a third instance of date type as date of birth in my employee type. Okay, so that would be another struct that has been defined. Similarly, if that employee was transferred to another department on a particular date, so I can write down another instances of date type as transfer date. Okay, so I can write down date type transfer date. So this is how I can actually use a struct within a struct. Okay, so let me just remove this for a while. This was just for your basic understanding. And then let's say कि मैं अपने main program के अंदर I can actually using these nested structures. तो nested structures में अगर मैं first name assign करना चाहता हूँ, तो what I'll do is, because name in order to access the first name of the employee, I'll have to first declare an instance of employee type, and then through that instance of employee type, I'll access name type. And once I'll access name type, then I'll access first here. Okay? So the structure here would be instance of employee type will access another structure, and then I'll access the members of that structure. And for that case, so in order to extract or in order to access a data member of a structure, I'll use a dot operator. तो एम्प्लॉय टाइप का अगर कोई इंस्टेंस है और उससे मैं नेम टाइप को एक्सेस करना चाहता हूँ या नेम को एक्सेस करना चाहता हूँ विच इज़ एन इंस्टेंस ऑफ नेम टाइप, तो आई राइट डाउन द इंस्टेंस ऑफ एम्प्लॉय टाइप डॉट नेम, और नेम के आगे मैं फर्स्ट को एक्सेस करना चाहता हूँ तो नेम डॉट फर्स्ट. So there are two dot operators that I'll be using in this particular case. Okay, in order to get the value, in order to assign the value, or in order to write down that value. So line number 48 is representing what? It is representing an instance of an employee. Say for example, a new employee has joined in, so I want to enter the values of that new employee. और न्यू एम्प्लॉय का नाम अगर मैंने एंटर करना है तो न्यू एम्प्लॉय विल फर्स्ट थ्रू न्यू एम्प्लॉय आई विल एक्सेस द स्ट्रक्ट नेम and name variable, and from that name variable I'll actually access the first variable. So this would be new employee dot name, which will take me from this structure okay, this would take me to the employee structure, which is employee type. Dot name will take me to this structure, and then dot first will take me to the first variable. So this would be new employee dot name dot first, and then I can write on the name, which is, let's say, Rashid. अगर middle name भी डालना है तो यार Yan or Rizwan or whatever are available. ठीक है, and then I can actually run this program, and then we can actually see कि इसके अंदर जो है वो क्या उसमें स्ट्रक्चर को वो रिप्रेजेंट करता है. ठीक है जी, ओके. Right, so we haven't included here the library, the initial part of the program. So यहाँ पे I'll have to add these and then run it. And here you can see that the program actually compiles. ठीक है, so हो क्या रहा है? If I can just annotate this thing. Okay, so here you have employee, and here you have the name, and we have declared an instance of employee. So that instance of employee will take me, so here let's say I have new employee, let's say here. ठीक है, so new employee will take me to the employee structure, employee type. ठीक है, and then from there this would take me to name. ठीक है जी, in this particular case like this. ठीक है, so in order to reach this new employee dot the attribute or the variable here जिसको मैं access करना चाहता हूँ, which is name in this case. ठीक है, and then from here to here another dot operator. तो एक dot operator इधर आएगा और एक dot operator इधर आएगा. Right, I hope this clarifies. ठीक है जी, okay. So this actually completes our discussion on uh, the nested structure. So you can have a nested representation of the structures. Okay, now there is another important thing that we need to discuss, and that is the setter and the getter function. So I'll explain that with the help of another small piece of code that would make life easier. Okay, for you to understand that. Okay, and within this program, we'll again discuss the constructors also. The example that I'll be showing you now, और उसमें default constructors और दूसरा जो आपके parameterized constructors हैं वो सारे के सारे आ जाएंगे. अच्छा, let's start from this. Okay, so we have defined a structure point, and point contains its coordinates, x coordinate and y coordinate. And then line number 16 represents a constructor. A constructor, you can see that the name of the constructor function or the name of the constructor is same as the name of the struct. So ये भी point है और ये भी point. No argument is passed. If no argument is passed in this function, then it's actually a default constructor. And I have initialized the value of x and y to be 0 and 0. Okay? Now, immediately below that, line number 21 is also representing a function. And that also has the same name, point, as the name of the struct. Okay? As the name of the struct. But the difference between the default constructor declared at line number 16 and the constructor that has been declared at line number 21 is the arguments. Line number 21 में the function contains arguments, right? So if I want to initialize it, if the user want to initialize an instance of a struct, parameterized constructors can be used. Otherwise, default constructors will primarily be used. Okay? Otherwise, default constructor will actually be called. And in order to call the default constructor, you don't have to do an explicit call, whereas any other function, including the parameterized constructor, an explicit call is required. Okay? An explicit call is required. And let me just show you that how this can actually be done. For that, I'll just write down a small piece of code here. Now forget about the other functions for a while, I'll come to that later. But here are the two okay, so let me, for clarity, I'll just write it here. So these are the two instances point के जो मैंने declare किए हैं line number 45 के ऊपर and P1 instance has been declared, and line number 46 के ऊपर P2 instance has been declared or variables have been declared. P1 में it doesn't have any arguments like this, ठीक है, लेकिन P2 के अंदर we have passed on two variables 2,7, two arguments have been passed. तो दोनों केसेस के अंदर कंस्ट्रक्टर कॉल होगा, लेकिन 45 के केस के अंदर बिकॉज नो पैरामीटर्स हैव बीन पास्ड while defining or while declaring P1, therefore default constructor will be called. ठीक है, और 46 में जब मैं P2 को डिक्लेयर कर रहा हूं because the arguments have been passed, अब parameterized constructor will be called. Now if I run this program, and let me just complete this so that you don't encounter any error here. If I run this program, P1 के लिए initialization आपकी वो होगी जो कि default constructor में है, और P2 के लिए initialization वो होगी जो कि parameterized constructor के अंदर है. Remember parameterized constructor को मैंने call किया है with argument 2 and 7. So P2 का xy जो है that should have the value of 2 and 7 respectively, और P1 का जो xy है that should have a value of 0. Both zeros here. Okay, so you can see कि इनको मैंने P1 को जब मैंने print किया I got 0 0, और जब मैंने P2 को print किया I've got 2 and 7. So what happens in 50 and 51, यहाँ पे parameterized constructor has been called. On 48 to 49, default constructor has been called. Just to recap, this is the default constructor, no arguments, parameterized constructor with arguments. And remember, for parameterized constructor, this represents an explicit call to parameterized constructor. अगर मैं इसके भी arguments को ख़त्म कर दूं, I'll not be requiring an explicit call to default constructor. And now you can see that both have been initialized with 0 and 0. So parameterized constructor आप अपनी मर्जी से initialize, I mean अपनी user अपनी values दे के initialize कर सकता है. You can get change those values. लेकिन अगर आप default values के साथ initialize करना चाह रहे हैं किसी struct variable को, तो you don't have to call an explicit constructor. It would automatically be called, and that is what is happening at this moment at line number 45 and line number 46. ठीक है जी? And I can put the values as well here. I mean parameterized constructor की call भी मैं दे सकता हूँ. Okay. Now, so once you have initialized it using parameterized constructor या using default constructor आपने initialize कर दिया, and then while executing a program there were some changes that were made, x की value update हो गई, x की value को आप update करना चाहते हैं, ठीक है. For example, you want to know कि इस वक्त let's say x की value क्या है. So in the middle of a program you are doing some sort of say analysis, and in order to run that analysis you need to know कि इस वक्त x की वैल्यू क्या है, और अगर x की वैल्यू जो है वो आपको पता चल जाती है, यू आल्सो वांट कि आप x की वैल्यू को दोबारा से सेट कर टू, और या x की वैल्यू को आप कोई नई वैल्यू असाइन कर दें. से फॉर एग्जांपल इफ यू से कि यू वांट टू नो कि आफ्टर लेट्स से सेमेस्टर 3 स्टूडेंट का जो ग्रेड है वो क्या है, and you don't you can run and calculate the value yourself. I mean that's perfectly fine. Lekin at some point in time you want to display that somehow on the screen. Yeah, if there is an employee and the salary of that employee is there and you don't remember कि उसकी salary क्या set हुई हुई है in the program, so you can define a special function which is called a set function, or a get function, or you also call it a getter. So आप एक getter define कर सकते हैं, special type of a function जो कि किसी भी variable की value को get कर सकता है from the program. This is what you call as the get function. And then the other type of function is which is called the set function or the setter function or the setters, जहाँ पे आप वैल्यू को सेट कर सकते हैं. से फॉर एग्जांपल if your employer is extra happy and wants to give you an increment, so वो आपकी नई वैल्यू को जो है नई सैलरी जो है वो सेट कर सकते हैं whenever that person actually wants, or whenever the manager of your boss actually wants to set that value to a new value. ठीक है. तो आप किसी भी वक्त अपने प्रोग्राम की एग्जीक्यूशन, अपने प्रोग्राम के अंदर आप अपने स्ट्रक्ट में जो डिफरेंट वेरिएबल्स आपने डिफाइन किए हैं उनकी वैल्यू को गेट भी कर सकते हैं. यू वांट टू रीड, यू वांट टू फाइंड आउट कि व्हाट इज़ द प्रेजेंट वैल्यू ऑफ अ वेरिएबल, and at the same time you can also set that value to a new value also. तो उसके लिए आप setter और getters यूज़ करते हैं. ठीक है. setters और getters again उसके एक standard format है, and that is represented here. So this function here is representing the set functions. So line number 27 में this is the setter function. It sets the value of x. ठीक है. सो आप जो भी आर्ग्यूमेंट इसमें देंगे वो x की वैल्यू को उस पर सेट कर देगा. दिस इज व्हाट दिस फंक्शन इज एक्चुअली डूइंग. एंड लाइन नंबर 31 में इट्स द सेटर फंक्शन और सेटर फॉर y. सो यू गिव एन आर्ग्यूमेंट, कॉल दिस फंक्शन, गिव एन आर्ग्यूमेंट टू दिस फंक्शन एंड इट वुड सेट द वैल्यू ऑफ y. ठीक है. सो यू कैन सेट अ न्यू वैल्यू टू x and y whenever you want in your program by calling this function. Now this function that sets a value is called the setters, or are called the setter functions or setters. ठीक है. And if before setting a value, if you want to get a value कि आपको पता नहीं है what is the value that has been set at present, you can write down the get functions or the getters. ठीक है. So these are the two functions that are the get functions. So okay, so 37 to 38, sorry, 37 to 40 is the is a getter for x. You simply write down a function. You don't need to put an argument here, and you simply return the value of x. Whatever the value of x is, it would return that value of x. ठीक है. Nothing else. ठीक है. Similarly, getter y के लिए जो है ना, get y के लिए it would return the value of y. ठीक है. Whatever value of y is there at this point in time. So setters and getters are also two types of functions that are part of the structures. You can define them as part of the structures. Now the utility of these functions are quite important. ठीक है. Remember the difference between constructors and setters. Constructors जो हैं, they are for initialization, and setters जो हैं, they are for updating the value or setting the value whenever you want to set a new value. ठीक है. So these are actually used at that particular point in time. Constructors जो हैं, they'll only be called at the time of declaring an instance. आप सेटर उस वक्त कॉल नहीं करते. फॉर एग्जांपल डिफ़ॉल्ट कंस्ट्रक्टर मैंने आपको बताया ना, जैसे ही आप इंस्टेंस डिक्लेयर किया P1, कंस्ट्रक्टर कॉल हो गया, लेकिन सेटर गेटर को एक्सप्लिसिट कॉल देनी पड़ेगी आपको. ठीक है. So that's the difference. You need to keep this difference in mind. Okay. So I hope the difference between the use of the setter functions and the use of the getter functions, or getter setters and getters is clear. ठीक है. Setters are those functions that set a value of the variables that are part of the struct, and getters are those that return the value of the variables that are part of the struct. ठीक है. The same concepts are used for advanced concepts that we'll be learning in future. So let's move on to the program again, and let's use these setters and getters in order to change the values, as I told you. Okay. So this is primarily here you'll actually say setting values. ठीक है जी. So these are the values that have been set by the setter functions, and this would be cout. We can say that okay, this is getting the values. ठीक है. using the getter functions. तो यहाँ पे आप set को कॉल कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. और यहाँ पे आप get को कॉल कर रहे हैं. ठीक है. एंड बिकॉज इट्स रिटर्निंग अ वैल्यू, सो आपने P1 की जो भी वैल्यू गेट की है x की, वो आपको x1 में आपने स्टोर कर ली, और P1 के y की जो वैल्यू है वो आपने y1 में स्टोर कर ली. सो यू आर गेटिंग द वैल्यू एंड पुटिंग इट और स्टोरिंग इट इन अनदर वेरिएबल, और यहाँ पे यू आर सेटिंग दीज वैल्यूज. ठीक है. एंड रिमेंबर, यहाँ पे आप क्या कर रहे हैं, यहाँ पे आप कंस्ट्रक्टर के थ्रू वैल्यूज़ को असाइन कर रहे हैं. सो लेट मी जस्ट रन दिस प्रोग्राम and you can see the difference. ठीक है. So okay, so these were the values, ये all zeros at the start 4, these were the values that were set initially, और ये default constructor के through आपने किए. फिर you set the values for P1 through 3 and 4 by using the setters, और उनको display किया, and then you are getting the values for you are getting the values for P1, I mean P, X and Y again. ठीक है. So you are getting those values. ठीक है. So you, meanwhile let's say कि दरमियान में if there was a function call जिसमें आपने X की वैल्यू को चेंज कर दिया था, and after that you don't really know कि इसकी वैल्यू क्या है, तो you can actually use the getters to to get those values. So at any point in time in your execution of the program, if you want to get a value of a variable, you can use getters. If you want to set a new value to a variable, you can use setters. ठीक है. So I hope this clarifies the use of setters and getters. ठीक है. So you can actually use these variables.